Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 851 for December 27th, 2020. Coming up on our final episode of the year,
I call it the last 7 years to be the greatest lesson of naivete, because had Will and I known everything we know today, I'm not sure we ever would have bought the property. You actually have to be a little dumb to take on what we did, and I'm glad we were.
It's been 7 years since Wes Murry and Will Arvin set their sights on acquiring an old abandoned distillery site in Kentucky. A year later, they paid a reported $950,000 for the Old Taylor Distillery's 113 acres and went to work clearing years of overgrowth and debris. What's now known as Castle and Key Distillery has just released its first whiskey, a 3-year-old rye, and will release its first bourbon in the coming months. I'll talk with Wes Murry and Will Arvin, along with Brett Connors and John Brown from the distillery team later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have my tasting notes for their debut Castle and Key Restoration Rye whiskey in the What I'm Tasting This Week department. We'll also have the calendar of events, your voice, and on Behind the Label.
We have an incredible business model, and we're going to continue with it. But we do have those situations where, our own brands are growing, and what do we do to support that?
The news is next on this holiday week edition of WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Mark, how are you, buddy? A quick thank you for letting me loose on WhiskyCast this past year. Oh, cheers for letting Dave tag along too. And happy holidays from all of us at Redbreast. We'll see you in Cork again soon. But until then, sláinte.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Hey whiskey fans, I'm Gabriel Cardarella, brand ambassador for the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's. You could probably guess I've got a lot of stories, but for me, the good ones have one thing in common. They're best told over a glass of whiskey. So this holiday, give the gift of a good story and even better whiskey. Give the gift of Dewar's 15.
Let's get started with the news, and there is breaking news as I'm recording this on Sunday night. U.S. President Donald Trump has agreed to sign the massive federal spending package into law. It provides $908 billion in COVID-19 economic aid, along with funding federal agencies through the end of the fiscal year next December. While Trump administration officials had been telling everyone in Washington that the bill had President Trump's support before last Monday's votes in the House and Senate, the president started ripping into Congress almost as soon as the final votes came in. He had threatened to veto the entire package unless Congress raised the direct payments to Americans from $600 to $2,000 per adult. The package also makes permanent the federal excise tax break that small-scale distillers and importers have been getting for the last 3 years on a temporary basis. Had Trump followed through on his threat to veto the bill, small distillers would have faced an immediate 400% increase in their excise tax bills starting this Friday. American Craft Spirits Association CEO Margie Lehrman has had one eye on the news and the other on the calendar all week long since the vote, waiting for the president to act.
The biggest change, Mark, for everyone right now is in a world where we've been living in a parallel universe of some, I don't know, TV series that none of us would want to enter again. With each episode entering more uncertainty, finally, we are able to deliver to these small businesses an element of certainty that can allow them to plan. And even among the other stuff, at least this possibility of a 400% tax increase will not be floated in front of them. It means investors won't be so hesitant to put the monies back in. It means that our craft distillers can work with their farmers and have some certainty that they're going to be able to pay for that grain.
Some of your members were probably looking at layoffs pretty much immediately after the first of the year, had this not gone through, right?
Absolutely. I spoke to a number personally who said, Margie, if this does not go through by January 1st, the first week in January, we will be expecting layoffs within our distillery. So many others I had talked to with great sadness in their voices told me their stories of thinking they were going to be able to carry people through and recognizing when they got into Q3 and Q4 this year that they just couldn't keep going. So many who are actually old and established distilleries, I wouldn't have thought would have faced the same peril that so many of the other newer entrants into the field were facing, but nonetheless, it was the reality.
What does it mean to have this locked in now and not have to keep fighting this fight every December, as you have for the last several years?
Well, it means, for one, that my family might have a little bit more of my time and attention for the holidays, and people might get a different sort of present because I will actually have the ability to think through things in a different way. But anyone in this industry has probably been faced with the same thing. I can't thank enough not only members, individual members, and the state guilds, and the own leadership within ACSA. But at this point also, Congress deserves a really big thank you from us. Both sides of the aisle, both chambers. There were some who are named sponsors of the bill who actually, along with us, would not rest until this was made permanent. And we've been told all along that we were the locomotive only because that our co-sponsorship on both sides of the aisle, as well as both chambers, was so incredibly strong that the other tax extenders actually got a chance. And finally, I think we were able to show Congress, despite the fact that there were 33 other extenders expiring at the end of this year, and it would have been very easy for Congress to say, let's just give them all another year and then we'll look at it again. They were willing to take that step, break us off, and give us permanency.
The legislation also includes economic assistance for distillers, bars, restaurants, and other businesses affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, including more funding for Paycheck Protection Program forgivable loans. Meanwhile, Great Britain and the European Union hammered out their differences over their post-Brexit trade relationship this past week. That clears the way for the UK to break its last remaining ties to the EU this Friday. There will be no tariffs on whiskey and other exports from either side, but there will likely be delays at border checkpoints for customs paperwork, except on the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. That border will remain checkpoint-free to comply with the Good Friday Peace Agreement, and Northern Ireland will remain part of the EU's free trade area for now. Whiskey shipments from the UK bound for the entire island of Ireland will clear customs at ports in Northern Ireland. Racial inequality has been one of the major stories of 2020, and while it is a small step, there is some good news out of Louisville this week. The Yarbrough brothers, Victor, Christian, and Bryson, have now officially opened their Bro Brothers distillery in Louisville's West End. That makes them the first African-American distillery owners in Kentucky. Here's the audio from their news release this week.
Bro Brothers would like to introduce you to Bro Brothers Bourbon and its distillery in Louisville, Kentucky. Bro Brothers, honoring the age-old legacy of Kentucky bourbon. Bro Brothers Bourbon, make memories with your family and friends. Join us on the journey. Bro Brothers Distillery opening soon. Bro Brothers, it's a way of life.
The opening soon refers to their distillery shop, which will open by appointment only this spring. Their whiskeys made using contract distilled bourbon are already available in 5 U.S. states, with plans for wider distribution in 2021. The Yarbrough brothers have been in a race with Sean and Tia Edwards of Lexington's fresh bourbon to open their distilleries. Recent news reports out of Lexington indicate that the fresh bourbon project has been delayed just a bit because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have reached out to both families for interviews, and we hope to have them on a future episode of WhiskyCast in the near future. There were a handful of new whiskeys announced in the days leading up to Christmas, including a new range from the Mcleod in partnership with Spain's Roca Brothers. The Distill Your World range kicks off with the London Limited Edition, which was created to reflect the essence of London, right down to a touch of Earl Grey tea. It's bottled at 57.5% ABV and will sell for around £2,600 a bottle in the UK. There's also a new entry in the Irish whiskey world. Highball Spirits is debuting the Sailor's Home line of whiskeys created by Dr. Jack O'Shea, with the Journey blend, the Haven Single Pot Still, and the Horizon 10-year-old. They're available now in the UK, with prices ranging from around £42 a bottle to £59. Mel Heim left Portland's East Side Distilling earlier this year, and we now have word on what she's been up to. She's one of the founders of a New Mexico-based whiskey brand, Big Nose Kate Western Whiskey. It's named for a Hungarian woman who was said to have been a bank robber, among other things, back in the 1800s during the Wild West days in the U.S. The plan is to launch the whiskey this May in 4 U.S. states. Mel and her partners are working on a seed round of funding to expand distribution to 9 more states over the first 3 years. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but Beam Suntory has decided to start bringing its Alberta Premium Canadian whiskey to the rest of the world after keeping it in Canada for all these years. The initial export release is the 2020 batch of Alberta Premium Cask Strength, which follows up on last year's debut release that won a number of awards in various competitions. George Tycrobe is the general manager at Alberta Distillers in Calgary.
I think there's some great things that are going to happen with the cask strength, and it's, just another one of those limited edition items that we were able to produce, and it's going to be tough to keep that in stock. I mean, we knew that it would be the original, launch would be only a few thousand cases. And, same with this year. And we're not going to see that change for a few years until we can get ourselves in a position where we can grow it beyond a limited edition.
I'll have my tasting notes for the 2020 edition soon at the WhiskyCast website, and we'll hear more from George later in this episode. Rye and wheat are the most often used flavoring grains in bourbons, but distillers can use anything that's officially listed as a cereal grain. Paul and Mary Beth Tomaszewski at Kentucky's M.B. Rowland Distillery have taken that to a new level with the first known Kentucky hemped bourbon. It follows a change in federal law a couple of years ago that loosened restrictions on hemp cultivation. Only 228 bottles are available through the M.B. Rowland Distillery shop in Pembroke, Kentucky. Unfortunately, they can't ship bottles right now. Finally, we have some sad news to report this week. One of the patriarchs of the Scotch whisky industry has died. Sandy Grant Gordon was one of the great-grandsons of Glenfiddich founder William Grant, and he gets the credit for championing Glenfiddich as a single-malt whiskey brand back in the 1960s. He was also responsible for opening the first distillery visitors center at Glenfiddich in 1969. Sandy Grant Gordon had been hospitalized following a fall last week when he died the other day with his daughters at his side. His wife Linda died back in October. Sandy Grant Gordon was 89. Please join us in sending our condolences to his family and his colleagues. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. Next time around, I'll be announcing our first Whiskey Club of the Month for 2021. There is still time to nominate your club. Just use the contact form at WhiskyCast.com and tell us a bit about your club. If you have a website or a social media presence, we'll be glad to add a link on the Whiskey Clubs page at the WhiskyCast website. And each month's winning club receives 24 WhiskyCast Glencairn glasses to use at club tastings. Time now for the calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. If you're still in the mood for holiday lights, Buffalo Trace's annual Lighting of the Trace display continues each night through New Year's Day at the distillery in Frankfort, Kentucky. The Spirit of Toronto's Robert Burns Virtual Tastings Series runs from January 21st through the 24th online. Teeling Whiskey Company in Dublin will host an online Brabazon Series virtual tasting on January 21st. Spirit World in Omaha, Nebraska has a Women in Whiskey online discussion and tasting that same night. The final Maker's Mark Community Bottle event benefiting the Lee Initiative takes place January 25th at Teresa's in Wayne, Pennsylvania. Bonham's will have its first whiskey auction of 2021 on January 29th in Hong Kong, and McTeer's starts its series of 2021 whiskey auctions February 12th in Glasgow, Scotland. Remember, all in-person events should be considered tentative and subject to change because of public health restrictions. We are updating the calendar at WhiskyCast.com throughout the week as we get updates on event changes. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. Ever wondered what veggies, salt, chili peppers, and even beans can do to a cocktail? Catoctin Creek co-founder Scott Harris is leading his 7th annual Art of the Cocktail class this winter, but this year it's all online Friday nights starting January 8th. Scott will be looking at some wacky and weird ingredients you may have never tried in cocktails before. You can get all the details at CatoctinCreekDistilling.com. And Catoctin Creek reminds you to always drink responsibly.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Gabriel Cardarella again, the Dewar's guy. The holidays have always been a big part of our story. People have been unwrapping bottles of Dewar's for over 174 years. Once, we even had someone call our distillery requesting an entire cask for the holidays. That's right, a barrel full of delicious whiskey. If you were at that party, congratulations. It turns out wishes really do come true. Pretty cool, right? Well, here's another story for you. In 2019, our master blender, Stephanie Mcleod, became the first woman to be awarded Master Blender of the Year by the International Whiskey Competition. And a year after that, she won it again. Stephanie's first creation for Dewar's 15 year, is another piece of history. Sweet, floral, with notes of honey and toffee, a perfectly balanced addition to the Dewar's lineup. It makes for the perfect gift. A great introduction to Scotch for beginners and more than complex enough to satisfy whiskey aficionados. So whether you're buying a gift for your father-in-law or treating yourself, make it a Dewar's 15 year and share a few stories of your own. That's what the holidays and good whiskey are all about.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by the 2020 Distillers Edition collection. Kentucky's Old Taylor Distillery closed in 1972, and while dreamers talked of reopening it over the years, nature took its toll on the historic site. It wasn't until 2014 that 2 of those dreamers finally signed their names on the deed and put up the money to make those dreams a reality. Will Arvin and Wes Murry went to work, bringing in construction crews to clear away decades of brush and debris, hiring Mary Ann Eves to become their first master distiller, and signing contracts with Pinhook Whiskey and other brands to supply them with whiskey once production began in late 2016. They also had to fight off a lawsuit from Sazerac, which owns the rights to the Old Taylor Distillery name. That led to the adoption of the Castle and Key Distillery brand. Now, 7 years after they first considered the idea of bringing a piece of bourbon history back to life, Castle and Key's first whiskey is in the bottle, the 3-year-old Restoration Rye. I spent some time on a Zoom call the other day with Wes Murry and Will Arvin, along with blender Brett Connors and quality manager John Brown.
What does it feel like to finally, after all you guys have been through over the last 5-6 years now, to finally get your own Castle and Key whiskey out on the market?
It's pretty damn cool. I guess for Will and I, it's for Will it's been longer because he looked at the site for a year or two before we met. But I mean, from us together, it's been a little over 7 years now. And to think that, even though the place was just a mess and we bought it, to think that you'd have to wait 7 years to release a almost 4-year-old rye whiskey seems sort of hard to believe. But it's really cool. And just to see all the different things come to fruition over the last couple of years, the product, the package, the team, everything, it's I don't know, it's just really, it's cool to see it all come together.
Will, your thoughts? I was there at Old Taylor back in probably 2012, and the place looked like it had been bombed and then overgrown with weeds. So to see it even possibly come back was a dream at that time. Your thoughts after finally seeing your whiskey come out?
Well, you're right. We've come a long way with a great team. But it's particularly special because of the conscientious choice that we made back in the early formative days of what were we going to do with a product. Were we going to source the whiskey and start selling, taking whiskey maybe outsourced and then to the market under our label? And we made a very economically difficult decision, but we think it was the right one to sell only what we make here. And so that was our mantra, and it's taken a long time. It definitely was not the easy route to go, but over the years we've learned a lot, and we have assimilated a great team, and we've moved a few mountains here. We've made some mistakes along the way, but they've been educational. And so taking all that into consideration for us, it's just really incredible to be at this point, 7 years later, having to do it the way we've done it, and exciting to put the liquid to lips and share it with our friends in the bourbon industry.
Tell me about this first release.
You want to talk about that, Brett?
Yeah, I think what's been exciting about this first release is having the opportunity on the blending side to really showcase the work of our production team, of our warehousing team, and from a bottle design standpoint, our operations and brand side. I always think myself and John Brown really have the best part of the gig. Like, we already take great whiskey and we just get to showcase how good it is. It's definitely a really nice opportunity. But this first release is 2 differentiated batches. So we started with about 228 barrels of rye whiskey. The minimum age was about 3 years and 5 months. The average age was closer to 3 years and 9 or 10 months. And John has all the data, so he can correct me if I'm wrong. But then we had the arduous task of tasting through 228 barrels. And then we ended up making some smaller sets that were a little bit more functional to work from. And we ended up with 2 different batches, batch 1 and batch 2. Batch 1 is a consortium of 60 barrels. Batch 2 is a blend of 57 barrels. They are differentiated proofs as well, where our whole ethos with this was really to look at more of like a viticultural perspective or winemaking and kind of come at our batch approach, where our goal isn't to be consistent for the sake of quality, it's to have our quality be our consistency. So we knew that we didn't want to make the whiskeys identical in profile. So what I think you'll see with batch 1 and batch 2 is a really great example of what our rye whiskey can demonstrate like at that age structure, but with each batch being really unique. And we definitely hope to move that forward, where every year you're going to see something inventive, creative from us, and every batch will be a little bit special. We let the whiskey do its own thing. We let it speak for itself. And I think it's been a really fun project to give that to consumers, which, as you see consumer loyalty weaning, that they always want something new. They want something different. So to be able to kind of follow in what our consumers are expecting as well has been really, really fun. So, yeah.
That's an interesting philosophy because most brands over the years have tried to at least keep the products as consistent as possible from year to year so that consumers know what they're getting. It seems like you guys are taking the exact opposite approach.
On purpose. But I think the key word there that you said is most whiskey brands are trying to go down the route of consistency, right? And so when we looked at it, that's a pretty crowded space. And let's be honest, they're really good at it. All those guys have been making whiskey in some cases for over a century. And so when we looked at where could we play in the marketplace and then juxtapose that against what are people buying and really getting excited about, we said, well, wait a minute, to Brett's point, we want quality to be our hallmark, maybe not so much the actual flavor profile. I mean, you're going to know it's our rye whiskey because it's still our mash bill, but we are trying to create subtle variability that people can taste from batch to batch and year to year. It makes it exciting, we think. And that's what we really strive. I mean, when you go to a liquor store, you talk to a liquor store owner, they want to sell single barrel picks. They want to sell, the limited releases, the LTOs. And so the strategy here was how do you build an LTO model at scale? And so that's been sort of our focus, and, really proud of what John Brown and Brett did. I know Will is too, in terms of building this first release, because it's sort of like it's better than a beta case, but you're testing to see if people are really going to gravitate towards it. And so far, they have.
I have tasted so far the Pinhook releases that beat yours to the market. Not going to ask whether you guys feel jealous because Pinhook went to market first, but tell me about the differences between the Pinhook ryes from Castle and Key and your own ryes. And John, maybe you can handle that one.
I'll do my best, but Brett's probably best to speak to that. But I think we're happy to work with Pinhook. I mean, we've had a great relationship with them, and it was kind of cool to see their product hit the market and kind of see some feedback on it, really, before we put our product out. But that's what made sense for them. But for us, didn't feel like our rye was quite there. We wanted to give it a little more time to age up because this is like our first release, and we don't really know how our product's going to age in the warehouse since we're so kind of new to it. We've been tasting our barrels like every 6 months. Like, we really want to understand how they mature in our warehouses, and we could get a sense of with this rye. It was beginning to peak, but really didn't start to peak until this year when we released it. So, they have a little bit different product strategy, so they were able to make their product work with not having as much age on it as we wanted it to have. And so we were kind of, the neat thing is we have two, we're distinctly different products. And of course, they had a different mash bill. So they, their product, was able to reach maturity maybe a little bit sooner than ours was.
Brett, you want to throw anything else in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's exciting for them is that, at the ages that they're utilizing, I think rye has a lot to offer and, has a lot of flavor directionality that they, for their brands, were really, idealized on and excited about. And their master taster, Sean Joseph, has a phenomenal palate. So when we're blending for them and, helping their team develop goods, stylistically, you're going to see parallels where, our blending team's always very focused on a nose being really like lavish. Like, if it doesn't smell good, you don't want to drink it, right? We always want to make sure there's nice, good palate viscosity, there's a good palate depth. But I think what's exciting is, they were looking for a little bit more like bright tonal grain construct, where at 3.5 years old, waiting on our goods, we're just seeing a little bit more like dark tonal, like depth complexity, a little bit more spice derivative, where, I think it's just two stylistic approaches to whiskey. I like their stuff. Obviously, we're involved in the blending of it, so we should. But I'm really excited about the Castle and Key stuff just from an age perspective. As well, with our bourbon, you won't see bourbon from us for another year. You'll see it in 2021. And I don't think young bourbon's a bad thing. I think we're doing a really good job, with their product strategy for a younger whiskey, especially a bourbon. But I'm really happy to work with a 4 or 5-year-old good, frankly. I think what we find is that when you're working with younger spirits, you're able to still get a really great profile. Just the amount of hard work that it takes to make those barrels commingle correctly and to obscure young flavors or things that aren't ideal. It's just a lot more work. Where being able to work with John Brown on this, driving a ton of data. John had a ton of organoleptic and olfactory information that we don't necessarily have when we're working on clients' brands. In some ways it was more efficient, but in reality it just was it was the same amount of time. It just allowed myself and John to be a lot more neurotic about what flavors we were trying to build and how we were trying to build them.
Will and Wes, the question I have for you is, Brett mentioned the contract clients, and you guys have really jumped into contract distilling as well with Pinhook and other folks. Between that and the tourism business, obviously the distillery is historic in nature, a beautiful place now that you guys have restored it. How important was that event focus? Because I know you opened for events a couple of years before the whiskeys have even started to come out. How important has all that been in terms of helping you keep things going while you wait until today for the rye whiskey and 2021 for the bourbon?
Well, from my perspective, the contract distillation business has been a big help. And we've been lucky to have some really great clients that have been very collaborative and work with us. We're obviously a new company, and we've had a lot of really smart people working with us to help us make sure that we are doing everything right. And we had some early clients that came in and just expressed a vote of confidence. So that meant an awful lot to us, and those relationships are longer term. So and they've got their customized mash bills and processes, and so we try to honor those, and we learn from some of those experiences as well. So that's part of the fun of this whole spirits business, is seeing what other people are doing and working together, and what if we tweak this a little bit, or what if we do something else a little differently. And so I think the net effect is we all learn. So that's been a great part of our business, and we've enjoyed it very much. And then, of course, the events and the having the home place be a place where people can come and get to know us has been fantastic. Colonel Taylor built this back in the 1800s with his two sons with that premise in mind. So he was the visionary that started bourbon tourism, really. And so we're just trying to be good stewards there, and built on what he started with that pardon the pun, with that spirit of things. So COVID's put a little bit of a clamp down on that, but we're going to survive that. We've got our core hospitality team, and they've been fantastic. The response, the reviews have been fantastic and very supportive. And so we're also lucky that we can offer hospitality in an outside venue, thanks again to the original designs of Colonel Taylor. So we try to do that in a very safe way, and still let people come and see the grounds, experience our brand and our people, get to know our folks, even though we're not offering tours right now. But hopefully that'll change in the not so distant future. But it's just a great way for us to get to know our friends in the industry, and let people come out and have a taste and see what we're doing.
How much construction and restoration still has to be done at the site? I know you focused on the distillery buildings and a couple of the warehouses to begin with, but how much work still has to be done?
It's a kind of a blank slate there. We could keep going probably forever. One of the monuments that we haven't touched yet is what we call the administration office or administration building, and that has a lot of potential for something really fun, like maybe a restaurant or a small boutique bed and breakfast. But so that would be one of the bigger projects buildings that sort of is on the horizon. And then Colonel Taylor's old bottling building is just a great landmark, and there are a lot of pictures online that folks can go out and look at and see. But they had fountains inside the bottling house, and ladies in white dresses, and it must have been something to see back in the day. So that's a building that at some point is probably on the radar. And then we've got a slew of other things that we would do, but it's a pretty big elephant here on 113 acres. So we've been trying to take it a bite at a time. And again, I mentioned earlier, we've moved some mountains, so we're proud of what we've done over the past 6-7 years, but more to come.
The running joke before you guys bought the place was that the first thing anybody would have to do to be able to restore Old Taylor is go in there with a tanker truck full of Roundup to kill the vegetation. How hard was it to clear that stuff, and what did you guys find in that process?
We had a lot more than Roundup in here to take away the vegetation. It was some pretty heavy duty excavation equipment that came in, and that is one of the first things we did to clear out a lot of the brush and things that have been covered up. And so that gave us an opportunity to really see what we had and what we had to work with. And so probably for me, and Wes probably has some other things to add to this, but when we were excavating that forest in an area that we thought from some of the historical documents was a sunken garden. And so when the excavators started to clear that, what appeared were these old sidewalk grids. And as far as we know, those are the original sidewalk grids from Colonel Taylor's day. So the person that was on the excavator said, "Oh, you guys need to preserve this because I'm going to get my rubber tires on, so we'll keep it intact." And then lo and behold, we actually found a building in that thicket in that grove that we didn't even know existed. So there was some Pompeii exploration excavation that went on, and we had some pretty neat finds.
And probably more than a few critters, too.
Some reptiles and critters and all kinds of warm and fuzzy things.
I have to ask, and feel free to decline to answer this if you want to, but how much of the credit for what you're doing now and what you're releasing now should go to Mary Ann Eves, who was your first master distiller and was there at the beginning of the project? I know she has left now, and the terms of that you guys don't have to get into, but how much of the credit should she get for these initial whiskeys?
Mary Ann was a instrumental player at the start. I mean, you have to start there. I mean, when you think about like all the different steps that we took along the way to get where we are, wouldn't be where we are without her. And I know Will and I were sad when she left, as was the team, for her to go out and sort of experience what she's doing now, which wish her much success. But she played a meaningful, significant role in where we are today, and as does our current team. In fairness to them too. I mean, both Brett and John were the guys behind the blend that we have now, and there's a whole distillery team of roughly around 25 individuals who run that plant 24/7. Who are the guys who are and the guys rolling the barrels and doing the actual bottling work. So the whole ecosystem there gets a lot of credit. But yeah, no, I mean, you have to give Mary Ann her credit where credit's due.
So when are we going to see you guys have a barrel rolling team in Bardstown during the Bourbon Festival?
Well, our warehouse manager Ron is the guy to ask that. They're pretty good at it, I call it the weight loss crew because there's a couple guys who started and were a little on the huskier side, and about 2 months later they're like really lean. So like if you're looking to lose weight, just work on Ron's crew for about 2 months, slinging 500-600 pound barrels around, and it'll take care of itself.
7 years in, are you where you thought you would be? And then let's extrapolate that forward 7 years from now. Where do you think you'll be 7 years from now?
It's a tough question to answer. I'll answer from my perspective, and Will may be a little different. And the people who work with me, we know me well. Like I like to move fast and do things quickly, and efficiently and strategically, but fast. So being 7 years in and releasing our first product, I'm I'm very excited, but wish it would have been sooner. I call it the last 7 years to be the greatest lesson of naivete, because had Will and I known everything we know today, I'm not sure we ever would have bought the property. You actually have to be a little dumb to take on what we did, and I'm glad we were, because otherwise I think it'd still be, in need of some serious roundup. 7 years from now, I mean, for us, we're trying to figure out, ultimately how big do we want to get. We've got some lofty goals, in terms of case sales, but we don't want to lose sight of the underlying sort of strategy here of making a high quality product that people covet. So where's that level? Well, economically, it needs to be over a certain level. But after that, that's sort of just a choice that we'll come to. And, there's, to Will's point earlier, there's just so much we want to do with the site. I mean, it's a treasure. And we could spend as much money as we have already spent on what needs yet to be done. And that money doesn't quite exist yet. But the hope and prayer is that, through these, releases, now that we're into our whiskey world, that cash flow may soon be on the horizon. Will may have some other comments on that.
Sure. I guess in some ways, it's taken a really long time to get where we are, but in other ways, and more important ways, this has been a passion project. And I think of this place as a very spiritual place. So when you're coming down here and you're having fun, the time roller starts to roll pretty quick. So it's been, from that perspective, it's been a really fast journey. It's hard to believe 7 years have actually passed since we first started with this dream. And as I've said before a couple of times, the mountains we've moved with a phenomenal team and really bright people. And by the way, Mary Ann was an integral part of that, if I could add my part to that. In a relatively short period of time, we've done a lot to take an old site that was literally about to fall down to have a site that I think has been brought back to Colonel Taylor's glory days, and something we are very proud of, and hopefully our community's proud of, and our state is proud of, and we feel like we've saved something that was on the verge of total ruin. So 7 years have been action-packed, a lot of fun, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. It's just been a monumental big project. And then as for the next 7 years, I think we're going to roll the momentum straight in, and it will probably move at a similar pace. And the next sort of chapter that will unfold next year and lead to a lot of fun, different options and things for us to do is with bourbon. And then our gins and vodkas. That's a passion spirit for, I think, our team too. And we've done a lot of creative projects with, especially with the gin and the seasonal releases. So I don't know, the options are unlimited. And you asked about the space restoration, so there'll be a component part of that, and continue with R&D in our products and grow, hopefully, and grow our reach out for our spirits, greater geographical distances.
Wesley, you mentioned the investment so far. Have you put a number to that yet, or do you want to put a number to it?
No, don't want to put a number to it. But as I like to say, Will and I, again, naive, right? So I think we can conservatively say that we're 10 times over our original, estimate, which the first estimate that Will and I did, in fairness, was back of the envelope. But so maybe it's closer to five or six times, but it's meaningfully more. Our initial goal was, and somewhere in my email archives, we still have the drawing, was 6 barrel a day kind of pot still system. But then then we realized, we've got some electricity upgrades, and we've got some natural gas issues, and you have to start bringing this stuff to the property, and you start adding that to the spreadsheet, and you're 6 barrels a day is not going to get it done. And so that's when we started, to kind of look at the site from the perspective, hey, this was a distillery, It was set up to be a distillery. Let's just try to reconnect the things that are already here and leverage the 40 years of engineering that was in place. And that's how the money really started to flowing. But if had we not made that investment, I'm not sure we'd be in a position where we'd be able to have the quality of the product, the quality of the packaging, and certainly the quality of the team that we have today. I mean, it's all symbiotic. And so to be where we are now is, it's cool, like I said at the beginning.
There was a close call for Castle and Key in the summer of last year when lightning caused a massive fire that destroyed 2 warehouses at Beam Suntory's Old Crow Maturation Complex. Castle and Key's 113-acre site backs up to the Old Crow warehouses along McCracken Road, and there were concerns that the fire could spread through the trees and vegetation to reach Castle and Key. Fortunately, Woodford County firefighters were able to keep that from happening. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by the 2020 Distillers Edition collection lineup of single malts from Diageo's Classic Malts. Look for this year's editions of Oban, Talisker, Lagavulin, Cragganmore, Dalwhinnie, and Glenkinchie at a whiskey shop near you. Get all the details at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start with the debut release from Castle and Key. Restoration Rye is a 3-year-old rye whiskey bottled at 51.5% ABV. As our guests noted, there are 2 batches. I have a sample of batch number 1. The nose has sweet notes of molasses cookies and chocolate fudge, along with subtle spices and just a hint of maple syrup. The taste is thick, chewy, and sweet at first, with touches of dried fruits and molasses cookies, followed by a burst of baking spices, while chocolate fudge and a touch of oak add complexity in the background. The finish is dry with long-lasting spices and hints of chocolate fudge and molasses cookies. I'm scoring batch 1 of Castle and Key's Restoration Rye whiskey a 92. While we will have to wait until sometime in 2021 to taste the first official release of Castle and Key's bourbon, Pinhook Whiskey has released the regular strength version of its Bohemian bourbon distilled at Castle and Key. I shared my tasting notes for the high-proof version this past summer. The regular version is bottled at 47.5% ABV. The nose has touches of pencil shavings, grilled peaches, toasted vanilla, charred oak, nutmeg, allspice, and a slightly herbal touch. The taste has notes of cinnamon candies and peppermint, along with touches of honey, toasted vanilla, peaches, and a soft oakiness. The finish, long and subtle with gentle spices, complemented by a touch of dried fruits. I'm scoring the Pinhook Bohemian Bourbon 2020 crop a 92 as well. I can't wait to see what Castle and Key's own bourbon tastes like. I'll have more tasting notes for you in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. We all think of Friday the 13th as unlucky, and that's why Sagamore Spirit celebrates Rye Day the 13th instead. Sagamore Spirit is offering you the chance to win your own barrel of whiskey, sort of. You can find out more at sagamorespirit.com/Rye the 13th. The contest ends this Thursday, December 31st, so you need to act quickly. U.S. residents only, please. And Sagamore Spirit reminds you to always drink responsibly. Last time around, I talked with Dr. Nick Morgan of Diageo about the 200th anniversary of John Walker opening up his grocery store in Kilmarnock, Scotland. Walker started blending his own Scotch whiskies at that store, and it grew into today's Johnnie Walker. The John Walker & Sons celebratory blend is part of the 200th anniversary celebration. It's inspired by the Highland whiskeys John Walker blended back then and is bottled at 51% ABV, which makes it one of the stronger Johnnie Walker whiskeys available. The nose is sweet and fruity with notes of dried peaches, apricots, and touches of honey and vanilla. The taste is nectar thick and fruity with peaches and apricots, followed by a nice touch of allspice and white pepper. Honey and vanilla linger in the background. Those spices dominate on the finish for a long time, while dried fruits and honey linger underneath. I'm scoring the John Walker & Sons Celebratory Blend a 94. And finally, let's wrap up this dumpster fire of a year with a whopper of a whiskey. The Glenrothes released its oldest expression ever back in October, a 50-year-old single malt distilled in 1968. I received a wee sample just in time for the holidays. It was matured in a combination of ex-bourbon and sherry casks, and only 50 decanters are available at a recommended retail price of around $35,000 each. That's why the sample was small. It's bottled at 48% ABV. The nose has a great balance of wood and fruity character, with hints of cedar, peaches, and dried flowers. The taste starts off sweet and fruity, then the spices take over with a burst of cardamom and clove, complemented by oak tannins, while hints of garden herbs and vanilla add complexity. The finish is long and subtle with an excellent balance of lingering spices and dried fruits. I'm scoring the Glenrothes 50-year-old single malt a 95. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,000 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Happy holidays! On behalf of Redbreast, here's to you and yours. Eating well, enjoying a redbreast or two, and getting all snug and cosy on the couch. Reminds me of my own nest. Sure, there's no cushions or blankets, but I do have some very fancy decorative twigs, let me tell you.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Time to open up the inbox now for this week's Your Voice. First off, thanks to everyone who passed along their best wishes for the holidays to our family over the last few days. One of the resources we have on the WhiskyCast website got a shout-out on Twitter this weekend from the folks at Club Enologique, which is a UK-based wine and spirits magazine. They highlighted our Scottish distillery names and pronunciation guide in the pub section of the website, with the source of Ladybank's name. It's derived from the Scots Gaelic translation of Boggy Slope. The guide is something we inherited back in 2009 from Jeroen Kloppenberg when he closed down his PeteFreak.com website, and I have to admit it is something that we should update in the coming months, since it does not include many of the newer distilleries in Scotland like Amanderg or Dalmunach, let alone distilleries in Ireland, Japan, or other countries. For instance, I'm pretty sure I've been screwing up the pronunciation for Nikka's Miyagikyo distillery in Japan for many years now, but no one's called me out on it yet. Last week, I mentioned the online discussion that Billy Abbott and Rachel McCormick are holding on yourstories.com January 14th. I got this email from Chris Glenn. At approximately 16 minutes 30 seconds of the most recent WhiskyCast episode, a coming event was mentioned, the best night out in, possibly on yourstories.com. I've tried typing in that address on my browser, and they get a holder page for website sellers. I may have misheard it, and I've listened several times. Is there any way you could clarify that address? Thank you, Chris. Well, I emailed Chris right away. I should have made it more clear that the website is yorstories.com, your stories without the U. Sorry for the confusion. Last week on Behind the Label, we compared the number of whiskey distilleries in France and Ireland. France has more than twice as many, though most of them are very small distilleries. The other day I posted a graphic of the French Whiskey Federation's distillery map on our social media feeds. Robbie Hunterkamp tweeted this from Singapore. I knew about a few, but until La Maison du Whisky in Singapore hosted a tasting with their Version Française bottlings a few weeks ago, I had not tried more than Armoric. They have some very interesting releases. Left out our traditional cookies and a glass of whiskey for Santa Claus on Christmas Eve, and posted a photo on social media. Paul J. Marco responded with this on Instagram. Now we know where Santa's first stop is every year. Merry Christmas. Hey, it's easy for Santa Claus to get burned out after a few million plates of milk and cookies in one night. Now this week I'd like you to help us out with our traditional New Year's question. What will be your final dram of 2020 and your first dram of 2021? You can tell us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or you can email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's wrap up the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. I mentioned contract distilling earlier in the news during our story on the Bro Brothers Distillery in Louisville. It's easy to confuse the term contract distilling with sourcing, so here's a brief explanation of the difference. Sourcing whiskey generally means that a brand owner is buying casks of mature whiskey, either directly from a distillery or through a broker. In the U.S., it's been common to associate sourced whiskey with MGP's distillery in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, which has been one of the largest suppliers of bulk whiskey for years now. Contract distilling is more of a longer-term relationship and more common than you might think. Before the bourbon boom of the last 10 to 15 years, many of Kentucky's larger distilleries could produce far more whiskey than they needed for their own brands at the time, so they would essentially rent out their distilleries to other companies. In fact, those companies often had their own distillery licenses, and the plant would display whichever license was being used at the time in order to keep all of the tax records straight. For instance, it's been common knowledge for more than a decade now that Diageo's Bullet Bourbon was originally distilled at Four Roses under a long-term contract, since both brands were originally part of the Seagram's empire. Kirin, which now owns Four Roses, chose to not extend that contract when it came up for renewal a few years ago, because it now needs all of the distillery's capacity for its own whiskeys. And that's why Diageo had to invest around $300 million in recent years to build its Bullet Distillery in Shelbyville, Kentucky, and its newest distillery under construction now in nearby Lebanon, Kentucky. Possibly the best-known example of contract distilling came following the 1996 Heaven Hill fire in Bardstown, which destroyed the distillery and about 100,000 barrels of whiskey. Heaven Hill's competitors all offered the Shapira family the use of their excess distilling capacity to keep making Heaven Hill's whiskeys, using the original strain of yeast handed down through Parker Beam's family over the years, and that lasted until Heaven Hill acquired the Bernheim Distillery in Louisville a couple of years later. This isn't just an American phenomenon, though. Gordon and MacPhail, Douglas Lang & Company, and Hunter Lang & Company are just a few of the independent bottlers that have long-term contracts with distilleries in Scotland to have their own casks filled with new-make spirit for bottling years or even decades into the future. As we heard earlier during the news, Beam Suntory's Alberta Distillers in Calgary has been getting a lot of attention recently for its Alberta premium rye whiskies, but its whiskies have also been used in Whistle Pig and other well-known brands. General Manager George Tykerobe told me the other day that increasing demand for Alberta Premium as it starts to explore the export market could lead to some pressure on its bulk Canadian whiskey business.
We have some incredible clients and we'll honor all contracts that we have. And like I said, we have an incredible business model and we're going to continue with it. But we do have those situations where, our own brands are growing and what do we do to support that? So, it puts us in a driver's seat and how we view the future. And, by no means, we're not going to, it's a small industry, right?
Beam Suntory has experience with contract distilling as both a buyer and seller. Its Canadian club whiskies have always been made at the Hiram Walker Distillery in Windsor, Ontario, but the breakup of Allied Distillers more than 15 years ago saw the Canadian club brand go to Beam Suntory, while the distillery itself went to Pernod Ricard's Corby Spirit and Wine division. There's a long-term production contract in place between the two companies to keep Canadian club production in Windsor. Beam Suntory also generated headlines as a seller after it acquired Ireland's Cooley Distillery at the end of 2011. Cooley's main business was contract distilling and bulk whiskey sales under founder John Teeling, but after the sale, Beam Suntory decided to allocate more of Cooley's production to the brands it acquired with the deal. It ended most bulk whiskey sales except where there were long-term contracts in place, and while that decision did ruffle some feathers, it may have helped contribute to the distillery construction boom in Ireland. Here's an example. The Cunningham family that owns Slane Castle north of Dublin had been buying whiskey from Cooley to bottle under its own Slane Castle label. After that supply dried up, the family did consider legal action, but instead they decided to build their own distillery at the castle and wound up partnering with Brown-Forman on the Slane Irish whiskey brand. You can listen to my August interview with Alex Cunningham in episode 833. It's in the archives at WhiskyCast.com. And if you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at WhiskyCast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at WhiskyCast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of all of our past episodes. We love to hear from you. You can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
At Doers, we love a good story. And that's why we're always writing new chapters. Like our Double series. 21, 27, and 32-year-old whiskeys, each double-aged for ultimate smoothness, then finished in different sherry casks, making them perfect gifts. Or even better, buy one and give it as a gift and keep the other for yourself. You know what they say, it's better to give and receive.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
People never forget the person who introduced them to Redbreast. And then those people go on to introduce others to Redbreast, and soon the flock has grown exponentially. It's like a pyramid scheme. Without any of the bad stuff, of course.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2020, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening. Please stay safe and have a happy New Year.